It was just a phase. You took it too seriously, she said after pulling away without explanation. I accepted that and moved forward quietly. Now she keeps revisiting old conversations, wondering why I'm no longer interested in restarting anything. You took it too seriously. Those 4 words hit differently when you've spent the last 3 months questioning your own sanity. I didn't say anything back, not because I had nothing to say, but because somewhere between the silence and the sting of that sentence, I realized she wasn't apologizing. She was dismissing. And what came after that moment? The quiet I chose, the distance I maintained, the life I built when she stopped looking. That's the part she never expected. That's the part she's still trying to understand. I didn't realize it then, but that single sentence rewrote everything I thought I knew about what we had. It didn't just close a door. It locked it, painted over it, and told me the door never existed. And yet here I am, not bitter, not broken, not standing outside that painted wall waiting for it to open again. That's the part that seems to confuse her most. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We were 26. I'd known her for about a year before things shifted, and by the time they did, we'd been whatever we were for close to 4 months. She worked in event planning. I worked in graphic design. We met through a mutual friend at a birthday dinner, talked for 3 hours straight, and exchanged numbers at the end of the night like it was the most natural thing in the world. That's all you really need to know about the beginning. The first 2 months were easy. Not the kind of easy where you ignore problems. The kind of easy where there aren't many problems to ignore yet. We talked every day, long conversations. The kind that stretched past midnight and into early morning without either person noticing the time. She had this way of listening, genuinely listening, not just waiting for her turn to talk, and I noticed it early on. It made me feel heard in a way I hadn't been in a while. We went out a few times. Nothing extravagant. Coffee, a walk, a couple of dinners, one afternoon at a bookstore where we stood in the same aisle for 45 minutes debating whether a novel she'd never read but judged entirely by its cover was worth buying. She bought it, sent me a voice note at midnight saying the cover had lied. The book was actually brilliant. I fell asleep smiling that night. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. But here's the thing about easy beginnings. They don't come with warning labels. Somewhere around the middle of month 3, something shifted. Not suddenly. More like the slow dimming of a light you don't notice until the room is noticeably darker. Her replies got shorter. The calls got less frequent. The energy that used to meet mine on the other side of every conversation started arriving late, or not at all. I told myself she was busy. Event planning is genuinely demanding work. I gave her space the way you give someone space when you trust them, without making it a performance of giving space. But the space didn't help. It just became the new default. There was one evening, a Thursday, I remember because I had a deadline the next morning and I'd stayed up working, when she called unexpectedly. I answered on the second ring, relieved. She sounded normal, warm even. We talked for almost an hour about nothing in particular, a bad client she'd dealt with, a documentary I'd been watching, plans for a weekend market that was happening nearby. I thought the distance was over. I thought she'd just needed a reset. She hung up saying she'd talk to me soon. I didn't hear from her for 6 days after that. 6 days might not sound like much, but when you've been talking to someone every day, sometimes multiple times a day, 6 days of silence is loud. It has a texture. It asks questions. I checked my messages. All sent, all delivered, all read. No response. No explanation. I didn't flood her with texts. I sent one follow-up on day 3, something casual, nothing that could be read as desperate. Then I stopped and waited. She came back on day 6 like nothing had happened. A meme. She sent me a meme with a caption that said, "Meet every time I disappear for a week." I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to find it funny. Part of me recognized that this was the moment to either address what had happened or to let it slide into the category of things we never talked about. I chose to address it. Not aggressively, just honestly. I told her the silence was confusing, that I didn't know where we stood, that I wasn't trying to pressure her, but I didn't want to keep guessing. She said she'd been overwhelmed. Said she needed to clear her head. Said she was sorry if it seemed weird. I accepted that, because I didn't have a reason not to. But it happened again. Not immediately. She was present for about 2 weeks after that conversation. Then the same pattern returned, quieter this time, more gradual. Messages going unanswered for days. Plans floated and then quietly abandoned. Enthusiasm that arrived in bursts and then evaporated without notice. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not obsessively, just carefully. And what I noticed was this. She was present when she wanted something from the connection, attention, comfort, someone to vent to, someone to make her laugh. But the moment the connection asked something of her in return, she retreated. Not dramatically, just enough. Just enough to avoid having to show up fully. I didn't say anything for a while. I sat with what I was observing and tried to be fair to both of us. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe the pattern wasn't as clear as it felt. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I've been told I'm too sensitive before, and even though I've come to disagree with that framing, the voice still shows up sometimes, offering doubt at inconvenient moments. So I gave it more time, and the pattern held. Around the end of month 4, I brought it up again. More directly this time. Not heated, not accusatory, but clear. I told her I'd noticed a cycle, that I wasn't sure what it meant, that I genuinely liked her and wanted to understand whether this was something she wanted to invest in or not, and that either answer was okay as long as it was honest. The conversation that followed was not what I expected. She didn't get defensive. She didn't dismiss me immediately. She went quiet for a moment, then said something that I replayed for days afterward. She said, "I think I've been pulling back because I didn't want to think too hard about what this is." That sentence felt like honesty. It felt like the kind of admission that takes courage. I respected it. I told her I wasn't asking her to have everything figured out. I just needed to know she was in it with me, even if neither of us had a perfect answer yet. She said she was. She said she wanted to try. For a brief stretch after that, things were genuinely good. Better than the beginning, actually, because there was something underneath the lightness now. Something that felt like it had been tested and had survived. We were more comfortable with each other. More real. I remember a Saturday afternoon in particular. We'd ended up at her place after a walk, making lunch out of whatever she had in the kitchen, and the whole thing had a quiet ease to it that I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought, this is what it looks like when things actually work. Then, 3 weeks later, she pulled away again. Completely this time. Not the gradual dimming. The lights just off. No fight. No incident. No explanation. She went from present to absent in the span of about 48 hours, and nothing I could point to had changed. I sat with it for a week before reaching out. Not to demand answers, just to check in. She replied 2 days later with something short and distant. Said she'd been busy. Said she'd reach out when she had more bandwidth. I said okay, and I meant it. But this time, I didn't wait. Not because I was punishing her or playing games, but because something in me had shifted. Quietly, without announcement, without drama. I think the switch flips differently for different people. For some it's a fight, a breaking point, one line too many crossed. For me it was that week of sitting with the silence and realizing, with a kind of calm that surprised me, that I was tired. Not angry, not heartbroken, just done carrying more weight in a direction that kept changing. I started filling my time the way you do when you're rebuilding something. Not frantically, not to distract yourself, but because there's a quiet satisfaction in redirecting your energy toward things that respond to it. I picked up a project I'd been putting off. Started cooking properly again instead of eating whatever required the least effort. Spent a Saturday with a close friend, talking the way we used to before adult life, convinced both of us we were too busy. I didn't announce any of this. I wasn't performing a recovery for an audience. I was just living. She reached out about 3 weeks after going quiet. The message was warm. "Hey stranger, how've you been?" For words with a casualness that assumed we'd simply been on a break from each other, like two people who'd both been busy and were now catching up. I replied, kept it brief, said I'd been good, asked how her project was going. She took that as an invitation to reconnect. The conversation that followed was easy on the surface. She was warm, engaged, funny in the way I remembered. And I noticed something as I was responding. I was calm. Not the performed calm of someone trying to protect themselves. Actually calm. Like talking to someone I used to know well, but no longer felt attached to in any complicated way. At the end of that conversation, she said something I wasn't expecting. She brought up a memory, something specific from one of our early conversations. Said she'd been thinking about it. Said she missed talking the way we used to. I answered honestly. Said those conversations were good. Left it at that. She followed up the next day, and the day after that. Over the next 2 weeks, she was more consistently present than she'd been throughout most of those 4 months. Messages every day, longer ones. References to things I'd mentioned in passing weeks ago, things she'd clearly remembered, stored, held on to. And then one evening, after a conversation that had run long, she said, "I feel like I messed this up." I sat with that for a moment. Then I replied, "It ran its course. Nothing to fix." She was quiet for a bit. Then, "Is that really how you see it?" "Yeah, I think so." Longer silence. Then, "I don't see it that way." I didn't respond that night. Not strategically. I just genuinely needed to think. Because there was something unfamiliar happening, and I wanted to be honest about what I was actually feeling before I said anything. What I found when I looked. No pull. No flicker of the thing I'd felt before. Not suppressed. Not buried under resentment. Just genuinely absent. Like a song you used to love that now sounds pleasant but doesn't move you anymore. You're not mad at the song. You're just not that person anymore. The conversation we had 2 days later was the one that finally surfaced everything. She asked directly whether I'd be open to starting over. Trying again. She said she'd thought about it a lot, about the pattern, about how she'd handled things, about what she wanted differently this time. She sounded genuine. I believed that she meant it. And I told her, as clearly and kindly as I could, that I wasn't in the same place anymore. She asked when that had changed. I said it had been gradual. She went quiet. Then, I didn't think you'd actually move on. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt, but because of what it revealed. I didn't think you'd actually move on. There was an assumption buried in that. An assumption that my investment in what we had was permanent, that it would sit there, patient, indefinitely, waiting for the moment she decided she was ready. And somewhere in the silence that followed, I think she heard it too. What she'd said out loud. What it actually meant. She called the next evening. I answered. The conversation started carefully, both of us measured, feeling for solid ground. Then she said it. The sentence I hadn't anticipated. "I think you took what we were doing too seriously. For me, it was kind of just a phase. I wasn't trying to imply something permanent." I heard every word. Just a phase. Too seriously. I let the silence sit for a few seconds before I spoke. And when I did, I didn't argue. I didn't catalog everything she'd said and done that contradicted that framing. I didn't remind her of the night she'd said she wanted to try, or the afternoon in her kitchen that had felt like something real, or the way she'd initiated most of the conversations in those brief good weeks. I just said, "Okay, I hear you." And I meant it. Not as acceptance of her version of events, but as the quietest, cleanest way to close a door that was already mostly shut. Here is what I've come to understand about the phrase, "you took it too seriously." It is almost never about the other person taking something too seriously. It is almost always about someone realizing, too late, that they weren't willing to be taken seriously, and needing to reframe the story so the failure lives somewhere else. "You took it too seriously" is a sentence designed to make the person who showed up fully feel like a fool, to retroactively rewrite genuine investment as naivety, to make caring look like a miscalculation. I understood what she was doing. I don't think she even fully knew she was doing it, but I understood it, and understanding it made it easy not to argue. After that call, I put my phone down and sat in the quiet of my apartment for a while. No dramatic feelings. No grief spiral. Just a kind of settled clarity. The kind you get when you stop trying to make something work that was never designed to hold your weight. Life moved forward the way life does when you stop standing at a window waiting for something to appear on the other side. Work picked up. I took on a project that stretched me in ways I'd been avoiding. A big rebrand. Something I'd been hesitant to pursue because the scope was intimidating. I threw myself into it. The kind of immersion that doesn't feel like escape because you're actually building something, not just hiding in the building. I reconnected with people I'd let drift. Made plans and kept them. Spent evenings doing nothing in particular with the comfortable ease of someone who isn't waiting for their phone to light up with a specific name. She reached out again about 6 weeks later. Different energy this time. Softer. A long message about something she'd been processing, vague in the specific way that's designed to invite questions. I replied, kept it present, normal, warm without being inviting. She responded quickly. Too quickly. The message ended with, "I've been going back through some of our old conversations." I read that twice, then replied, "Oh yeah? How come?" Her answer was something about nostalgia, about thinking about that period of her life. I let the conversation trail off naturally after a few exchanges. It happened again a week later. A screenshot, a message from almost 5 months ago, something I'd sent her during one of the good stretches. I found this. Made me smile. I looked at it. The message was something simple, a recommendation for a place she'd mentioned wanting to try. I said, "Huh, good memory." Then the conversation moved on. But over the next few weeks, the pattern became clear. She was revisiting things. Specific things. Old messages, specific exchanges, moments she'd remembered or screenshots she'd saved. She'd bring them up carefully, the way you approach something fragile. And each time, there was a question underneath the surface one. A check. Are you still there? Is there still something? Did any of this actually matter to you? And each time, I answered the surface question. Warmly, genuinely, without coldness. But I didn't follow her into the subtext. Not because I was punishing her. Because I genuinely didn't live there anymore. One evening she asked, more directly than usual, do you ever think about what could have been different? I thought about it honestly before replying. Sometimes. But I don't spend much time there. Why not? Because I'm pretty good right now. She took a while to respond. Then, I think I handled things badly. I think you did what made sense to you at the time. That's a very generous way to see it. It's just accurate. Another pause. Then, does it bother you at all that I didn't treat it the way you did? That question deserved an honest answer. So I gave her one. It bothered me then. It doesn't really anymore. How did you stop? I just stopped waiting for things to be different. That helps. I could hear, in the texture of the conversation, that this wasn't the answer she was looking for. She wanted me to be holding something. Sitting with some residual feeling she could lean into, some warmth that could be reignited. She wanted me to still be the version of myself that had been reaching toward her. And I understood that. Genuinely. It's a hard thing to fully reckon with. The moment you realize someone has stopped reaching. Not because they became cold. Not because they stopped caring about you as a person. But because the particular reaching, the specific emotional labor of hoping in your direction, it quietly ended. And they didn't even need to announce it. They just stopped. The next time she brought up an old message, I decided to say something. Not harshly. Just honestly. Can I ask you something? Of course. What are you looking for when you go back through those old conversations? Long pause. I don't know. I think you do. Another pause. Longer. I think I'm trying to figure out if I made a mistake. About what? About how I handled things. About the phase thing. About all of it. I let that sit for a moment. Then, do you think you made a mistake? Yes. Okay. That's all you're going to say? I mean it genuinely. It's okay that you see it that way now. But it doesn't change anything for you. No. Why not? I thought about the right way to say what I actually meant. Not the kind version that softened the truth beyond recognition. Not the harsh version that used the truth as a weapon. The actual version. Because the version of me that wanted what we could have been, I don't know if he's someone I can go back to just because the timing is different now. That person existed in a specific window. You weren't ready then. And I understand that. But I can't manufacture what he felt just because you are now. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, the message was short. I didn't think it would actually go away. I didn't plan for it to. There was one more conversation after that. About a week later, she brought up the afternoon in her kitchen. Mentioned it specifically, the lunch we'd thrown together from whatever was in the fridge, the ease of it, the way it had felt like something settled. I think about that afternoon a lot, she wrote. It was a good afternoon. Did you know then that you liked me? Like really liked me? Yeah, I did. I did too. I just didn't know what to do with that. I read that sentence twice. I did too. I just didn't know what to do with that. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me about what we were. And it came too late. Not deliberately too late. Not as a punishment. Just too late the way things sometimes are. Arrived after the moment already passed. The way you finally understand a song years after you first heard it, when the person it makes you think of is already someone else's story. I believe you, I wrote back. Does that matter to you? It does. Just not in the way it would have before. After that conversation, the messages became less frequent. She didn't vanish. That's not what happened. We still talked occasionally. The texture changed, though. The urgency drained out of it. The backwards glances stopped. Maybe she found what she was actually looking for. Not me, specifically, but the understanding she'd been circling. That she had been in it. That it had been real. That calling it a phase was a defense mechanism, not a description. That the person on the other side had shown up fully and, in the absence of the same, had eventually stopped. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. Out of the quiet, undramatic act of choosing yourself when someone else keeps choosing uncertainty. I've thought about what I would say to myself at the beginning of all this, knowing what I know now. The honest answer is, not much. I wouldn't warn him away from it. Those 4 months, even with everything, the pattern, the silences, the eventual dismissal, they were real to me while they were happening. They taught me something about the difference between being open and being available. Those two things look similar from the outside, but one of them has limits. One of them knows when to stop. I used to think being available was the same as being caring. That keeping the door open, staying patient, giving room for someone to figure themselves out, that was love, or at least the early version of it. I don't think that anymore. I think real care for yourself sometimes looks like closing the door, gently, without announcement, without needing the other person to understand why. She asked me once, near the end of those revisiting conversations, whether I ever regretted saying what I'd said that night on the phone. The okay, I hear you, that closed things down. Whether some part of me wished I'd argued, pushed back, laid out all the evidence that it hadn't just been a phase. I thought about it. No, I told her. Because that version of the conversation, me trying to convince you that what we had was real, I didn't want to have it. You needed to know that yourself. Or not. And if I'd figured it out sooner, I didn't have a clean answer for that. So I gave her the true one. I don't know, but sooner didn't happen. So it doesn't really matter. What I know now, from the other side of all of it, the silence you choose after someone dismisses you is not weakness. The peace you build while someone is waiting for you to stay broken is not coldness. The moment you stop reaching toward a door that kept moving is not failure. It's something closer to clarity, the kind that arrives quietly, without celebration, without any need for witnesses. She said it was just a phase, and maybe for her it was. But phases end, and what I became on the other side of hers, the version of me that stopped waiting, started building, found the ground under my own feet, that's not a phase. That's just who I am now. And some things, once they become who you are, don't respond to someone else's revised timeline. She keeps going back to those old conversations, looking for something in them, some signal that the door is still open, some version of me still standing on the other side. But I'm not standing anywhere. I'm already somewhere else.